The Three, November 17th, 1944. A hedge line east of Hastenrath, in the flat, wet farmland between Aachen and the Roer. The Panther had been sitting in the same spot since before dawn. Hull down behind a beat clamp, engine off, crew cold, the frost still holding on the glacis plate at 10 in the morning. Its commander had been fighting American armor since Mons in September, and somewhere in those 2 months he had picked up a habit his gunner thought was strange. He wrote things down. Not reports. Numbers. Hull numbers. That afternoon his gunner killed 3 Shermans in 11 minutes. The first one, at about 600 meters, a clean hit through the front plate that stopped it dead in the mud. The second one, turning, caught in the side. The third one, reversing toward a farm track, hit twice, brewing up in the way everyone in the German army had been told American tanks brewed up. Crews came out of all 3. He watched them run. He did not fire on them, and the record is silent on why. Before the light went, he put his scope on the wrecks and read the white stenciling on the hulls, the way a man reads the numbers on the side of a bus. He wrote all 3 down in a field notebook. At first light the next morning, the 3 tanks were gone. By 9, they were back. Not 3 replacements. Not 3 new tanks from some depot in the rear. The same 3. He read the numbers again through the scope, and then read them again because he did not believe the first reading. One of them had a fresh weld across the front plate, a raised silver scar the size of a dinner plate, still bright, not yet painted. 12 hours. 3 tanks he had personally watched die, sitting in a field east of Hastenrath with their engines running and their guns traversing. He did not have a word for what he was looking at. Neither did anyone above him. And for the rest of the war, German tank crews on the Western Front would keep filing the same kind of observation, in the same kind of baffled language, without ever getting an answer from anybody who was supposed to have one. They had killed the tank. The tank came back. Part 2. They were right now. Before we go anywhere near an explanation, I want to give the Germans their point. All of it. Because this story does not work if you skip the part where they were correct. The M4 Sherman was outgunned. That is not revisionism, and it is not a myth. In the summer and autumn of 1944, an American tanker in a 75mm Sherman, facing a Panther across 500 meters of Norman farmland, could not, in any practical sense, kill it from the front. The Panther's glacis was 80mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, which gave it an effective thickness that the standard American 75mm armor-piercing round simply could not get through. The crews knew this. They knew it in a way that men only know things when the knowledge is arriving through the periscope, and the Panther could kill the Sherman from anywhere, front, side, rear, at ranges where the Sherman's own gun was still an argument rather than a threat. The nicknames came out of that. Tommy Cooker. Ronson lights first time, every time. I should tell you honestly that historians have been arguing for 30 years about where those names actually came from and how widely they were really used, and the evidence for some of them is thinner than the internet believes. But the sentiment behind them was real, and it was earned, and no amount of statistical rehabilitation changes what it felt like to be inside one. Here is the number that settles it. The 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead, landed in Normandy with an authorized strength of 232 M4 Shermans. Over the course of the campaign in Northwest Europe, that division had 648 Shermans totally destroyed. 648 destroyed, from a starting strength of 232. Belton Y. Cooper was the ordnance liaison officer who had to count them. His job, every single morning, was to drive the length of the division front, find the dead tanks, count them, and requisition their replacements. He did that for 11 months. In 1998, he wrote a book about it, and he called that book Death Traps. The man who counted the wrecks named the tank a death trap. So when a German commander looked across a field at a burning Sherman and felt contempt, he was not being stupid. He was reading the situation correctly. He was just reading the wrong number, because in that same division, across those same 11 months, roughly 700 more Shermans were knocked out of action and repaired and put back into the line. 648 destroyed, about 700 resurrected. That second number is the entire war in Western Europe, and almost nobody outside the Ordnance Branch has ever heard it. Part 3. The Mistake. To understand where those 700 came from, you have to go back to 1941 and to a design decision that looks, on paper, like the worst mistake in the history of American armor. When the Ordnance Department sat down to specify the medium tank that would become the Sherman, the primary question they were answering was not what will beat a German tank. That question was in the room, but it was not the loudest voice in the room. The loudest voice was arithmetic, and the arithmetic went like this. Any tank the United States built was going to have to be loaded onto a rail car in Michigan, or Ohio, or Pennsylvania, and travel 2,000 miles inside the American rail loading gauge without fouling a bridge or a tunnel. It was going to have to be lifted by a dockside crane. It was going to have to fit through the cargo hatch of a Liberty ship. It was going to have to cross an ocean. It was going to have to come off in a port or over a beach. And then, on the other side, it was going to have to cross rivers on temporary military bridging built by engineers in a hurry, which meant it had to stay under a weight class that a Bailey bridge could carry. Every one of those constraints capped the tank, capped its weight at around 33 tons, capped its width, capped its height, except the Sherman came out tall anyway because of the radial aircraft engine it started life with. And a weight cap is an armor cap, and an armor cap is exactly the thing that got American crews killed at 500 meters in Normandy. So there it is. The Sherman was designed around the shipping chain instead of around the enemy. Read that sentence the way a German staff officer would have read it in 1944, and it is professional negligence. You built your main battle tank around a boat. But there was a second design requirement running alongside the first one, and it came out of the same arithmetic, and this is the one the Germans never priced correctly. If a tank has to travel 4,000 miles from the factory to the fight, it has to be repairable at the far end of that journey by men who did not build it, using parts that arrive in a box, without a single measurement being taken by hand. So the Sherman was built for that, not as a happy accident, as a specification. Interchangeable parts, machined to tolerances that meant any part fit any hull from any of the 11 plants that built them, without filing, without shimming, without an armorer's judgment. Suspension bogies that bolted on as complete units, so a mechanic with a wrench could take a whole road wheel assembly off a wrecked tank and put it on a live one. Track links that came apart and went together individually. An engine deck designed to be opened, and an engine designed to come out on a hoist and go back in the same day. Every one of those choices cost armor. Every one of those choices cost gun. And every one of those choices bought something that does not show up anywhere in a tank versus tank comparison chart, which is the only chart the German army was looking at. The men who did the work I'm about to describe were mechanics. They have no monuments, no medals, and almost no place in the histories. If you think their story is worth keeping visible, hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it keeps them in front of people who care about getting this right. Part 4, The Men with the Wrenches here, is what actually happened to those 3 tanks at Hastenrath, between the moment the Panther's gunner killed them and the moment they came back. Sometime after dark, a vehicle came forward that most people have never heard of, and that no German tanker ever wanted to understand: the M32 Tank Recovery Vehicle. It was a Sherman with the turret removed, carrying a fixed superstructure, an 18-foot A-frame boom, and a winch rated at 60,000 pounds. Roughly 1,600 of them were built. 1,600 purpose-built armored tow trucks on the same chassis as the tank they were recovering, with the same tracks, the same engine, the same parts. It came forward at night, into a field that had been contested that afternoon, hooked onto a dead Sherman, and dragged it back. Sometimes under fire. Sometimes with the recovery crew walking beside the cable in the dark. Behind that was a system the American Army had built with the same obsessive care it had put into the tank itself. 5 echelons of maintenance. First echelon was the crew, with the tools in the sponson box. Second echelon was the battalion's own mechanics, working out of trucks a few miles back. Third echelon was the Divisional Ordnance Maintenance Battalion, and this is where the resurrection actually happened. A field with tents and generators and lights burning all night, behind blackout screens, where men who had been civilian mechanics in Akron and Flint 18 months earlier pulled engines and welded plate over penetrations and cut turret rings. Fourth and fifth echelon were Army-level shops and base depots, where hulls that could not be fixed forward went to be rebuilt from the frame out. A Sherman with a clean penetration through the front plate that had not burned, whose crew had gotten out, whose engine and transmission were intact, was a 12-hour job. Weld a patch over the hole, replace whatever the round had destroyed on the way through, hose out the interior, new crew, or the same crew if the same crew was still alive. Back in the line by morning. Now hold that against what the German army had. The Panther weighed about 45 tons. The standard German heavy recovery vehicle was the SD-KFZ-9, the FAMO, an 18-ton half-track. One FAMO could not tow a Panther. You needed two, and in mud, you needed three. And three FAMOs hooked in tandem on a Norman farm track in the rain is not a recovery operation, it is a target. The Germans understood this. They designed the correct answer. The Berge Panther, a purpose-built armored recovery vehicle on the Panther chassis. And it was an excellent machine. They built about 350 of them, for an army fielding thousands of Panthers and Tigers across two fronts. And then there was the Panther's final drive. The gear assembly that took power from the transmission to the drive sprockets. Germany did not have enough of the heavy machine tools needed to cut a proper planetary reduction gear in the quantities the program required. So the Panther got a simpler double spur gear design that was, from the day it was drawn, underrated for the load a 45-ton tank put through it. Crews reported final drives failing in well under 200 kilometers of running. It was the single most common way a Panther stopped moving, and it did not require an American anywhere in the vicinity. Replacing it meant pulling the transmission. Pulling the transmission on a Panther meant, in practice, sending the tank rearward to a proper workshop. So the German tanker's situation was this. If his tank broke, he probably could not tow it. If he could not tow it, doctrine and necessity told him to destroy it, so the enemy could not have it. And he did. Thousands of times, with a demolition charge in the engine bay, standing in a field, looking at a machine that had cost the Reich more skilled labor than a squadron of fighters. If your father or grandfather served in an ordnance company, a maintenance battalion, a tank recovery section, or any armored unit in Europe or the Pacific, I would be grateful to know it. What unit, what theater, and what he told you about the work. The men who fired the guns are remembered. The men who put the tanks back together are not, and their families are the only archive left. Part 5, the arithmetic nobody was doing now. Put the two systems side by side and watch what happens to the kill ratio, which is the only statistic anyone ever quotes about this. The Germans were better at killing tanks. That was true in Normandy, it was true in the Ardennes, and it was true in the Reichswald. Take any individual engagement, and the German crew, in the better machine with the better gun, usually won it. But a German kill and an American kill were not the same object. When a Panther killed a Sherman, roughly 2 out of 3 times that Sherman was recoverable, repairable, or usable as parts, and there was a fully equipped organization standing by to come and get it that night. When a Sherman killed a Panther, or when a Panther simply broke, which happened constantly, that Panther was usually gone. Not destroyed in the sense of being reduced to fragments, gone in the sense of being unrecoverable, which for the purpose of tomorrow morning's attack is the same thing. Abandoned in a field, blown up by its own crew, or towed a few kilometers and left because the recovery vehicles were needed somewhere more urgent. The retreat out of Normandy and across the Seine in August 1944 is the clearest demonstration of it in the whole war. The German army did not lose most of that armor to Allied gunnery. It lost it to breakdown, to fuel starvation, and to the simple physical impossibility of dragging heavy tanks out of a collapsing pocket with 350 recovery vehicles spread across a continent. Whole regiments walked out and left their tanks standing in the hedges. The Germans were counting kills. The Americans were counting attendance. And there is one more layer, and it is the one that matters most, and it has nothing to do with tanks at all. The reason those 3 Shermans at Hastenrath could come back is that their crews came out. The Sherman had large hatches. From 1944, the 76mm turret added a dedicated hatch for the loader, so every man had his own way out. The interior was arranged so that men could get out of it in a hurry, with the tank stationary and full of smoke. British operational research teams went over the wrecks in Northwest Europe and worked out the human cost per knocked-out Sherman. The figure they arrived at was on the order of 1 man out of a 5-man crew. 4 out of 5 walked away, and the fires, the thing the nicknames were built on, were never really about gasoline. American and British investigators took the burned hulls apart and traced the cause, and the answer was ammunition. Rounds stowed in the sponsons above the turret ring, hit by a penetrating shot, igniting. So the Ordnance Department moved the ammunition down below the turret ring and packed the bins in a water and glycol jacket. Wet stowage, introduced during 1944. The proportion of penetrated Shermans that burned fell from somewhere in the range of 60 to 80% to somewhere around 10 to 15. Read that again. They took the single most mocked characteristic of the tank, identified the actual mechanism instead of the assumed one, and engineered it down to a fraction, in the middle of a war, on a production line running at full rate, without stopping the line. Verdict here is the verdict, and it is not the one either side expected. The Germans were grading the Sherman on the metric their doctrine had given them, which was, what happens when this tank meets my tank? By that metric, the Sherman was a poor tank, and they were right, and every honest American tanker who ever wrote about it agreed with them. The Americans were grading it on a completely different question. How many of these are in the line on the morning of the attack? That question has almost nothing to do with armor thickness and almost everything to do with weld access, hatch size, bolt patterns, parts interchangeability, recovery vehicle production, ammunition stowage geometry, and how many men who used to fix trucks in Ohio you can put in a tent behind the front with a generator and a welding set. The Germans built the better tank, the Americans built the better tank system, and then they built 49,000 of them. Panther production ran to about 6,000. Tiger 1, 1,347. Tiger 2, fewer than 500. But even the production numbers understate it, because production is a number about factories, and the thing that actually decided the campaign was a number about mornings. A German tank that was hit was usually out of the war. An American tank that was hit was usually late. That is the whole story, not victory through numbers. Victory through returns. And the men who produced those returns did not fire a shot. They drove into fields at night to hook cables onto machines that were still hot. They worked under canvas in the Ardennes in December, with their hands cracked open from the cold, pulling engines that weighed as much as a car. They welded plate over the holes where other men had died that afternoon, and they did not always have time to clean the interior properly first, and every one of them knew exactly what it was they were hosing out. I owe you one confession. The Panther commander at Hastenrath, the one with the notebook and the hull numbers, is a composite. I built him out of the pattern of observations German armor crews made across the Western Front, because the individual German who first noticed this and wrote it down is not identifiable in the record. Everything around him is real. Hastenrath is real, and the 3rd Armored Division fought there in the 3rd week of November 1944. The 648 destroyed tanks are real. And so are the roughly 700 that were knocked out and repaired and sent back. Belton Cooper is real. He drove that front every morning, counted the wrecks, and carried what he saw for 54 years before he wrote it down. The M32 crews are real, and almost none of them are named anywhere. The maintenance battalions are real, and they did not get parades. If this audit gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It puts this in front of the people who want the history the way it actually worked, not the way it looks in a comparison chart. Subscribe if you want the next one, because there are more of these. More systems, more mistakes that were not mistakes, more men who won a war with equipment everyone agreed was inferior. And remember what the mechanics understood, that the tank charts never will. You do not win by having the better machine. You win by getting yours back.